On today's show, a quick update on what's happening out there, then practical, realistic tips and guidance for small businesses to get through this coronavirus crisis. Our guest is Matthew Rowling. He's the executive director of the Office of Business Innovation at Wayne State University and a former entrepreneur himself. This is your Daily Detroit for Saturday, March 28th, 2020. I'm Jer Stays. We'll get to that conversation led by my colleague Sven Gustafson after we do a quick update on the situation out there. The state of Michigan's confirmed coronavirus cases continue to rise. There are now 4,650 cases and 111 deaths. The jump of 993 cases in one day is the most since officials started tracking. The city of Detroit is one of the epicenters of the pandemic nationally. There are 1,377 cases and 30 deaths in the city alone. Cases and deaths continue to rise across the metro region, with half of the cases statewide within Wayne County. Also interesting, and something we're following up on for a deeper story as to why, 68% of coronavirus fatalities in Michigan are men. Governor Whitmer also had a phone call with Vice President Mike Pence after a federal disaster declaration by President Trump. Here's audio of a quick update from her this morning about more N95 masks.
Just found out that 112,000 N95 masks got to the State Emergency Operations Center this morning. We're grateful to FEMA for that, grateful to the White House for the disaster declaration. We're working 24/7. There is much work to do, but this is good news in the midst of a lot of really tough stuff that's going on. So keep encouraging everyone to do your part. Stay home if you can. Check your warehouses to see if there's any N95 masks in there that you can donate to your local hospital.
Here in Detroit, the police department is especially stricken with more than 550 employees, about 20% of the force, currently in quarantine, as well as the police chief, James Craig. A Detroit Free Press report traces back the outbreak in part to a police and pancakes breakfast on March 9th. It's an interesting story showing how this is all connected, and I'll link to it in the show notes. It also shows the importance of contact tracing, a process that other countries have done to help flatten the curve by trying to figure out, best they can, who is connected to whom. All right, I'm going to hand it to Sven Gustafson, who's home in Ferndale, for our feature conversation.
Our next guest is Executive Director at the Office of Business Innovation at Wayne State University. Matthew Rowling is also a certified public accountant. He spent a combined 7 years at Rock Ventures and has also worked as a turnaround consultant in the aftermath of the Great Recession at Alex Partners. Matthew, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So the coronavirus, as we know, is on one hand, it's a health crisis, but it's also an economic crisis for all kinds of businesses, obviously, big and small. But of all categories of businesses, are small businesses sort of the most threatened by coronavirus and what's happening? I mean, what are we looking at here?
Oh, absolutely. You know, the $2 trillion bailout package that was passed by the Senate a couple days ago is aimed squarely at blue chip companies. There is a lot of money in that bill that will be used probably at the SBA, Small Business Administration. So there is some money that will be allocated there, but it remains to be seen how it'll be meted out and what types of businesses will qualify. And small businesses generally don't have the cash reserves that larger companies have or the access to capital markets. So there's a lot of uncertainty for small businesses and small nonprofits right now. It's really difficult.
What are you hearing from small business owners, in your capacity at Wayne State? I'm sure a lot of them are coming to you in a panic right now.
It's really interesting because as I started to put myself out there to try and help people, I assumed that a lot of the questions would relate to, okay, how do I communicate and negotiate with my lender? How do I communicate and negotiate with my landlord? But the questions that I've been getting most frequently are about human resources. What's the difference between a furlough and a layoff? How do I need to communicate with my employees? What's the best way to make sure that their opportunities for unemployment benefits are preserved? Which is really heartening because, at least for the people that I've been talking to, it means that a lot of people are doing their best to put their employees first.
Yeah, that's great. we're seeing a lot of small businesses that we know and that we've featured on this show start to get creative, right? Like, so, for example, we've talked to some businesses that have pivoted over to essentially manufacturing hand sanitizers. You're seeing that at some local distilleries, as a matter of fact. Some companies are pivoting to doing things like, making face masks with no guarantee that they will even be compensated for it. And we've spoken to a brewery that is spinning out all these new businesses doing things like selling frozen foods and trying to deliver some of their products. Are these sort of good ideas in your opinion, or is there further risk involved in doing these kind of things?
Well, I mean, there's always risk, but this is such a strange circumstance, right? If you had a typical recession, or even if the United States was at war with a foreign state, it's horrible, right? But it's also familiar, and it's easy to kind of point at the problem and say, well, this is the existential threat. But we have this circumstance where it's invisible, right? And we're being told to turn off or repurpose wide swaths of the economy without being able to see the problem, right? But what I think it's really important, because the actions and behaviors that companies take right now, I think will be judged, for years to come. And the first thing that you really need to do if you're a small business or nonprofit is take stock of your people and your assets and ask yourself, hey, how can I be part of the solution? Because if it's 4 weeks or 4 months, sooner or later we're gonna see the end of this tunnel. And the more creative you can get in being part of the solution, the more that we're going to be able to compress that period of time. And then, we're going to be out on the other side of this, and there's going to be an ocean of pent-up demand. People are going to want to celebrate. People are going to want to travel. People are going to buy cars and clothes and food and so on and so forth. And I think you're going to see a huge amount of brand equity and brand loyalty for organizations that go out of their way to think creatively about how to address this problem.
Mm-hmm. What sort of tips do you have for small business owners for things they can do to try to weather this, downtime and survive, essentially?
Cash is life, and for small organizations. And every single week that you can stay alive, we're 1 week closer to the end of the tunnel. We're 1 week closer to a vaccine. We're 1 week closer to more comprehensive testing. And so the very first thing you have to do is manage your cash extremely tight. When I was a turnaround consultant, the tool of the trade is a 13-week cash forecast. And every single week you roll that analysis forward, because you don't run out of money in a month or a year. You run out of money in a day. There comes one day where you can't make payroll, you can't pay your mortgage, you can't pay your landlord. And so the tighter you can manage that, right? And so if you get really accurate at modeling out your weekly cash flows, you can look into the future and you can see, oh my gosh, in 7 weeks, I'm not going to be able to make payroll. And that gives you 7 weeks to come up with creative solutions for pushing out your payables, right? So, working with your vendors or your landlord or your lenders, or coming up with creative ways to generate more cash. But the more time you have, the more creative, the less risk you have in executing on ideas to put more cash in the business. And so if you're flying blind, that moment in time where you might not be able to make payroll might surprise you. And if it comes at you quickly, you might not be able to react, and that's when you go out of business.
I'd imagine there's great demand for people who can consult with small business owners at this time, but a lot of them, of course, are in business themselves, and so for a small business owner, that's an additional outlay of cash. Any free resources out there that business owners can sort of take advantage of?
Yeah, absolutely. Through Wayne State is one of our sister organizations is TechTown, and TechTown is working furiously to both roll out a working capital grant program for small businesses, and we're also working on setting up, or I guess repurposing they have a program called Ask an Expert, where businesses can kind of come in and talk to somebody with skills and acumen to help them, figure this out. And so we're working there to bring in people like myself who can sit down and talk to nonprofit and for-profit business leaders to help them figure this stuff out. Because some of these analyses aren't, obviously the first thing you should do is, if you do have an accountant or some type of financial professional in your life, you should talk to them, right? And they're, at least from talking with my financial advisor, they're obviously super busy and have limited capacity as well. But through TechTown, we are working on offering those services and capital to small businesses.
And TechTown also has launched a loan program for small businesses, have they not, as part of this?
Yeah. That's actually the program I was referencing. It's focused on brick and mortar businesses in the city of Detroit that have owners that have average median incomes that I believe are at or below the poverty line. So if you're a small business in Detroit and you haven't been raking it in, it's something you should take a look at. And I actually think it's a grant program, not a loan program. So I think it's strings-free cash. And, kind of to that point, the second piece of advice I would give any small business or nonprofit right now is there's no such thing as having too much cash on your balance sheet right now. So if you have existing loan or line or credit agreements out there, if you have accounts receivable that you think you can collect or other invoices outstanding, you've got to do everything in your power to tap those lines or to get that money in your bank accounts as fast as possible, right? Because again, that just helps you increase your cushion more so that you can kind of get through to the other side of this lockdown.
You mentioned earlier the Senate passed stimulus package, $2 trillion. I was reading up on this, and it does have some things specifically tailored to small businesses, forgivable loans, payroll tax credits, a delay in paying Social Security taxes. You mentioned the Small Business Administration loan program. How helpful is all of this, and what would you like to see the government do more to help small businesses in particular?
It's really fluid, right? And these tools are being negotiated and developed at warp speed as far as, the federal and state government's concerned, right? So it's super important that if you are a small business or a small nonprofit, that you're keeping tabs on these in real time as much as possible. There are some things that are under the control of the federal government, and there's some things that aren't, right? And so, the federal government can't tell landlords, hey, you have to not collect rent, or they can't tell, lenders, hey, you can't foreclose on mortgages or loans, right? And when I say foreclosure, I mean that more in the commercial sense than the residential sense, right? But, so having said that, what kind of levers can they pull to help? Obviously giving a 90-day payroll tax holiday is huge. Giving individuals an extra 90 days to pay taxes is huge. Creating pots of money and funds of money that are either easily forgivable or low interest is huge. My only concern is that the levers that the government does pull, that they create windows that are long enough, that are wide enough and open enough to accommodate experts' best guess as to how long this is going to last, right? And you have people at the Trump administration talking about, the lockdown kind of subsiding in April. And that, at least to my knowledge, from what I've read from experts, is not probably feasible, right? And so you want to give, again, small businesses and nonprofits as much runway as possible to get to the point where state and local officials feel comfortable opening the economy back up. And 90 days, 3 months feels right. I'm not a public health expert, so I can't opine on whether or not that's the right window. I just think it's really important that when the federal government does create these tools, that they are consulting with health officials to make sure that the windows of time that they create are wide enough.
And then finally, it's always difficult to look into the future and make predictions, but thinking about when this is over and we return to some semblance of normal, will there be new opportunities or new needs to kind of adapt to a new normal, do you think, for small business?
Oh my gosh. I mean, the world won't be the same. It's really hard to see silver linings right now, and especially if you're furiously trying to, inject capital into your business, or worrying if you're like most normal human beings trying to kind of protect the welfare of your employees or your customers or your lenders or your other stakeholders, right? But I mean, the world will never be the same, and if you are running a nonprofit or a small business, this is really a moment in time for reflection. If you've been kind of going sideways for a while, right, and you've just been kind of feeling the drag and the fatigue of running a small business, you might want to tap out. You might want to close up shop, because I ran a tech startup for a year and a half. It's really, really hard. Running a small business, running a small nonprofit, it's really, really difficult. It's emotionally, it's a lot of work and effort. And so, this is a judgment-free time, right? If you feel like, well, this might be a good time to close up shop. Alternatively, the phrase that I kind of keep sharing with people is, hey, look, when times are good, you prepare for when times are bad. And when times are bad, you prepare for when times are good. And so if you want to keep growing your business in its current state, now's the time to, prepare for that moment, because, a lot of your competitors might not make it through. There's going to be a lot of pent up demand. And so thinking strategically about how you can really kind of take your organization to the next level is another option. And then the third path is a pivot, right? And, I think for the last 2 or 3 decades, right, we have had, the trends have been increasingly focused on the digital world, e-commerce, telecommuting, social media, et cetera. But having said that, by and large, most purchases the average American made were in a brick and mortar retail environment. And this crisis has just dumped gasoline on all of the digital fires in our world. And a lot of people that might have never dreamt of buying a dress online, or buying pet food online, or working from home, are all being forced to do that. And they're all probably going to get used to it. Right. And so what does that mean for our commercial world, a couple months from now? And so thinking long and hard about where your company fits into the new world order when this is all said and done is extremely important.
So this could be really a transformational moment in our economy, in other words.
There's no question about it. If you're in technology or public health or the built world, right, you need to be thinking long and hard about what this crisis means for your industry going forward. If you're in public health or research, epidemiology, you just got huge tailwinds for your work, right? Yeah. If you're in commercial real estate, or you have a brick and mortar retail presence, you are facing some incredible headwinds. And so, those questions really need to be asked, because it's not going to be back to business as usual for a lot of people when we're at the other end of this tunnel.
Wow. All right. Well, good stuff. Matthew Rowling is Executive Director of the Office of Business Innovation at Wayne State University. Matthew, thanks so much. Great information.
Thanks for having me.
And we're done for today. If you find what we're doing valuable, tell a friend. Let's push Detroit's conversation forward together. Also, welcome to all our new listeners. I don't know who you are yet, but you can always send a note to dailydetroit@gmail.com and say hello. A quick note that our show is powered by our members on Patreon, especially right now in these times where sponsorship, well, let's just be honest, it's not a thing. If you are able, you can join them at patreon.com/dailydetroit. We'll always keep the show free for everyone, but members get neat rewards and exclusive updates. And thank you for your support. With that, I'm Jairus Days. Take care of each other, and we'll get through this together.